All right, guys, good morning. We're going to talk about lessons learned with the spray drones. First of all, I want to thank the American Sugarcane League for purchasing me a drone. It's been a great little tool. Lesson one, compliance. And this really affects you depending on what size drone you have. Drones that are less than 55 pounds go under the federal code of Part 107 with the FAA. You got to get a special license. That is the license that I received. Pretty tough to get when you're dispensing ag chemicals from an aircraft. You also have to apply for exemptions, this Part 137. And I know the gentleman with Billy yesterday talked about, that's part of the service they provide. It used to be a very complex thing and took months and months and months to get. The FAA has gotten more efficient with it, but I think that's a great service and one that I would definitely consider. The last thing that I really want to talk about is the pesticide application license. To spray with a drone, you have to have a commercial license from the Department of Ag and Forestry. That's a whole nother test that you have to take to get that. So, and I had one girl said, no, we don't have to get it on the form. I called the guy at the Department of Ag and Forestry before this talk, and he said, absolutely, if you're going to spray with a drone, you have to have the certification from the Department of Ag with your pesticide card. Drones that are greater than 55 pounds, which are going to be the ones that most producers look at, they fall into a whole nother class of regulation that's a whole lot closer to like an ag tractor or a helicopter. So different rules. You have to apply for that exemption, that 44807 exemption. Again, working with the guy selling these aircrafts is a big help. And again, you still have to have that aerial applicators license from the Department of Ag and Forestry if you're going to use this as a method of applying any pesticides. Going through graduate school wasn't the easiest thing, but whenever I started studying for the Part 107 exam, it got real. And the lesson that I learned is you're not really very far from getting a Cessna license from the stuff you have to learn. You have to know what kind of airspace that you're flying in. You're supposed to be able to look at sectional maps and know. You're supposed to be able to know what the weather is at a given time on this test. It's not, can you just fly this drone? Now, one of the things that I would definitely do is, if you have one, is you download this app. It's a free app. It's before you fly. It tells you what kind of airspace you're in. And believe you me, with the FAA, you don't want to be flying in the wrong airspace. The picture where it's yellow, that was taken by the Shreveport airport, and you say, well, you're by an airport. One of the things that I learned in this whole process, Louisiana has more flights than any other state. And I'm going, man, that doesn't make any sense. But when you think about oil field, we have a lot of helicopters flying, so there's a lot of cautious areas. But before I ever put that aircraft up, I look at it. The other thing you got to look at is TFRs, temporary flight restrictions. So I remember where I was for 9/11, we were selecting seedlings in St. Gabriel, and the F-15 jets just started flying over. Whenever there's any kind of emergency, even if it's not that severe of an emergency, they can say, you cannot fly your aircraft. And this is an example at the bottom from Palm Beach County in Florida. So, that you cannot fly drones from this certain day to this certain day. And if you violate that, it's a federal violation from what I'm being told. So one of the things we really want to look at is what are the patterns of these aircrafts? It's real easy if you got a tractor, a mounted sprayer, to figure out what your spray pattern is. But we knew there was going to be some prop wash. So this is Dr. Randy Price. He's our ag engineer. Worked with him, brilliant fella. He developed a method. He runs out a cotton string. You fly that aircraft over that cotton string. It has a dye in the tank He's got a laser in this little box where this camera is. And after you fly, he sucks it in. That laser illuminates that fluorescent dye. He records it with a GoPro camera, and then he can look at how much variation that you have in that spray pattern. That's what he uses for commercial ag cats and ag tractors and helicopters. That's how he looks at the spray pattern to make sure that we're doing a good job. So we did a lot of work with him. One of the things we learned that there's a great potential for spray drift, and nozzle selection makes a difference. Whenever I purchased my DJI drone, it came with these XR11001 nozzles. You see, if you look at the TJet manual, it's a fine droplet at 40 PSI. We actually went to that AI XR11002. So if you look at the XR on this side versus the AI XR, at 40 pounds of pressure with the XR, you still have a fine droplet versus a coarse with the AI XR. So that makes a difference. DJI has come out with the T40. It's a 10-gallon aircraft. Randy Price had a chance to evaluate this. Instead of having nozzles, they have discs that they use to disperse the spray. He said it by far had a great spray pattern. He said, it was impressive. But they have a fine droplet disc and a coarse droplet disc. And he said the thing what was concerning is even with the coarse droplet disc, there were a lot of fine particles that could potentially move off target. That cotton didn't do a whole lot for me, so what I did is I set up 4x6 in St. Gabriel, stapled some paper and put some dye in the tank to see what kind of pattern I had. I really wanted to picture what we had. I'm not sure how well it shows up, but this is the pattern that I liked after looking at a bunch of nozzles and a bunch of heights and such. And I would suggest when you get a drone, you do this. One of the things I learned last week at the weed science meeting, they had a talk out of a guy from the north who sold surfactants. And he said, depending on what surfactant he used, it changed that spray pattern of that material. And I think that's a very big thing. You're going to have to test with the compound that you're using and put some dye in the tank. And I think this is a great way to do that. The spray height affects your spray width. Some of the work we did at Iberia, we put glyphosate in the tank. We flew it at 5 feet, and then we flew a single pass at 10 feet. And then we let it die, and we came back to see how much area was killed. When we were at the 5-foot height, we had a 9-foot spray width. At 10 foot, we got about a 12 foot. So that makes a difference. There is a potential for spray drift. I don't know how well it's showing up. Not great from what I can see here. But we were sprayed in a 5-mile-an-hour wind on a fallow field, and I had some non-GMO soybeans just to my left. And I came within about 10 feet of damaging those beans. I blew it almost 100 feet off target at 10 feet high. So you have to pay attention. It's not a foolproof system. Let's talk about this aircraft operations. We're going to cover a number of different topics. But manual versus autonomous operation. You can fly these things manually. And I don't see Charlie LeVere in the room. But we tried to dress up some ends manually. And I can fly a drone, but I could tell you what, I can't fly it in a straight line like you do when you're trying to operate this autonomously. So this is just a picture or a video showing some operations at the Iberia station. You set your boundaries, you tell it to go, and like the gentleman said from Helio, you press play and it does the rest after you have your boundaries. Field obstacles. Chris Patu, Mark Patu's son, came to me and he said, Al, I want to see if this thing will fly under the high power lines. And I was a bit nervous, when the league gave me the money to buy this thing, the last thing I wanted to do is to crash it. So we went into one of his 8-acre fields. We mapped the corners. I came in and then marked out the obstacle where that high line, where the poles were, and we flew it, and it did beautiful. It went under the high lines. It went up to the marked area, went around, had no issues. Now, I got to tell on myself, Dr. Kenneth said, not Dr. Kenneth, Dr. Kimbing said, Audubon wants to do a little bit of ripening work. We have the show and tell at St. Gabriel where we have all the varieties lined up. We need to put some ripener on it to do some work. No problem. Well, Kenneth and Braden Blanchard and myself were talking. I mapped the corners, put my aircraft up to fly, and it got all the way to the track, just about, and it stopped. And I tried to manually move it over, and it stopped. And I tried to manually move it over, and I was getting frustrated. And I marched my butt all the way to the end of the field. When I mapped it, I never saw this power line in St. Gabriel. And thank God for the obstacle avoidance, because I would have crashed it straight into that power line. But, you know, they talked about it, that safety feature being an airbag and not a seatbelt. But I'm sure glad that these things are a lot smarter than Al Orgeron is. Battery time, 10 to 12 minutes max, guys. And I want to show this right here. We learned this, myself and Damien Glazier, I worked with quite a bit in the New Roads area. For an efficient use of that battery life, you better not try to ferry it. You better have that aircraft where you want it to go. Because every time that aircraft has to turn and move and such, it's burning battery. And you can burn as much as 20% of your battery unintentionally without ever spraying a drop. So it's better to go to the aircraft to refuel and to swap out batteries, in my opinion, when it's dry. When it's wet, it's a whole different situation. If you're having to bring that aircraft to a central port, just know that you're going to be burning a lot of battery life. Damien was talking about going really big, having a 300 or 400 gallon tank of water, a nurse tank, and you know, he said, Al, once it got wet, I became real aware real quick. I couldn't pull this kind of thing in the field to save my battery life. So he said, you know, you got to kind of have either two game plans or go on the smaller slide where you can pull it with a side-by-side or a four-wheeler, in his opinion, from an efficiency standpoint. Battery charging. Learned a lot of hard lessons this way. You know, I'd say buy twice as many batteries as they tell you need, hands down, because the last thing you want that aircraft not to do is not to be running when you want them to be spraying. If these things are charging at 120 volts, you're going to wait 30 to 40 minutes to charge a battery. Damien tried that, and he said, Al, I was waiting 45 minutes before I could put that aircraft back up. He had a little bitty generator. He ended up going to a bigger generator. I'd say you need at least a 10,000 watt generator with these DJIs, charging at 240 volts with a 50 amp plug. It makes a difference. That's the only way you can get a rapid charge with these things. Really not sure about the Helio products, but it's definitely one of the things that I learned with that aircraft. How many acres you can spray for in an hour, and that really depends. So one of the things that I learned is efficiency. Now, when you study for that aerial applicators test, you'll learn you're supposed to spray across the wind. You're not supposed to spray with the wind. But from an aircraft efficiency standpoint, the longer run you can make, the better in terms of saving battery and not burning. So we did some work with Mike Harper where we flew 2,500 feet one way, 2,500 feet the other way. We can make 2 passes like that. Excellent. But if I'm running 300 feet coming back, 300 feet coming back, every time that aircraft has to stop, move over and come back on another pass, it's burning battery. Your GPA has a big difference. Your spray width. If you want to spray 9 foot wide versus a 12-foot swath versus an 18-foot swath, all that has implications on how many acres you can spray an hour. We did 8 to 10 acres with my little bitty 2.5 gallon T10. Damien said 20 to 22 acres with his T30 at an 18-foot swath. Now, you know, you heard yesterday up to a 40-foot swath, and everything that I've learned, just my experience, dial it down. You're not going to get that swath width and get a good uniform coverage. It just doesn't happen. With my T10, they said, oh, up to 20 feet wide. With the T30, they said 30 feet wide. You just don't have the right spray coverage if you do that. Pay close attention to settings. You know, they talked about a 3-year-old learning to be able to operate these things and such, and that's absolutely true. It's like using an iPhone. But I was spraying a test, ripening a test with Matt Gravois, and it was on some 615. And after I sprayed my first 2 replications, I was out of chemical, and I calculated how much I needed. And I started thinking, so I went back and I clicked one wrong button, so my swath width, instead of being 12 feet, jumped to 24 feet. So pay attention to that. These obstacle avoidance, if you're trying to fly on the high lines and you have the vertical upward obstacle avoidance on, it'll never fly under it. You have to turn it off. But that horizontal obstacle avoidance, if I would have had that thing turned off, it would have flew straight into those power lines in St. Gabriel's, those low energy lines. This auto terrain is another function that you got to watch. I ran into problems whenever I had any lodge cane in parts of the field, because it's following that terrain and that you have a dip, the aircraft will go down, but it can't come up quick enough, and then it breaks and it just burns battery, and you have to manually move it over. It takes several times to do that. So I started, when I had any kind of lodge cane, I set my height 10 feet above what the cane height was. So I was flying 17 or 18 feet, and I just set it at that's the height I wanted to fly when I was putting out some of these trials. Lesson 4, it's a very effective tool. You know, we put out glyphosate in the top left-hand picture on these beans at the Iberia Research Station because our spray tractor had broke down. It did a great job. The picture on the right-hand side of the screen is a field at Levere St. John with Charlie Levere. It's nutsedge. Charlie sprayed the rest of that field with his big John Deere sprayer. Charlie said, Al, I got so many calls wanting to know what we put out in that little section that you sprayed, and it was this glyphosate at 2 quarts. One of the things in terms of burn down with glyphosate, the less water you use, the more effective that herbicide is, and that is absolutely opposite with every other herbicide there is, but that's one of the things that Dr. Eric Webster taught me in graduate school. It acts funny. So that's one reason I think it did better on this nutsedge. The other thing is when you look at the downward force, you shake up the biomass, the weed-wise, and even when you're spraying ripener, you're shaking it up. You're getting deposition underneath that leaf and throughout that canopy. And they're stomates, and it's an easy way for that product to get into that plant. So there's work at Virginia Tech that shows that 2-gallon work with a drone is more effective than 10-gallon work with a tractor. Pretty interesting. This picture on the bottom left is from Mr. Charles Guidry farm. You see a little bit of green here and there. That's doveweed where glyphosate doesn't control. But you can see where I didn't spray, you got a lot of other green grasses coming. The final was a picture with Brandon Gravois where we did some ripener work with him. We'll show you a couple slides here on that, but it was very effective. Initially, when we did our first look at can we really use these tools, we put spray sensitive cords in the top, middle, and bottom of the canopy. This was at Jim Harper's after we had the 2 hurricanes 2 years ago. And we had deposition even at the bottom of that lodge cane, which was amazing to me with that spray drone. I didn't know I was giving a ripener talk today until last Sunday, so I had these slides in here. Just real quickly, as you look at the increasing glyphosate rates and you look at TRS, it mirrors that rate as we jump up. Same thing in 299. Last thing to talk about is service matters. Had an accident the first year with my controller. It took 7 months to get another controller in. With Damien's T30, we had one set of nozzles that wouldn't turn on. The person who sold him the drone couldn't help us. We called DJI in California because that's where you got to call for help. We were told it was going to take 3 hours before we could talk to anybody. Make sure you buy a drone with somebody who can service you. DJI got some guys, I believe in Arkansas, that are farmers who are good at. I really like Billy's solution that he has, but be able to get parts and be able to have a human pick up a phone, because we started taking apart Damien's $30,000 drone, and I'm kind of nervous. It was me, Greg Costello, and Damien, and what happened is they had a bent prong, and we weren't getting continuity, and the nozzle wasn't turning on, but it was definitely nerve-wracking. So I just want to thank Randy Price and Damien Glazier for helping me out, and definitely thank every producer, miller, and landowner that contributes to the American Sugarcane League for supporting my research efforts. Questions?
We got time for one quick question.
This drone is a rotary aircraft, but it's what I'm more concerned about is the nozzle orientation they talk about. So yes, the EPA is going to have to revisit some labels. Thank you.